Hi guys, thanks for sticking around for the last talk on Sunday. Really appreciate this. And before I start, given it's the last talk, let's give a round of applause to our organizers, to me and Hyun. Great papers, a lot of great company, a lot of food for thought. So last talk, don't promise you'll be the same level, but we'll try. And so then another thing, we have 45 minutes. Given it's the last talk, I thought I can add more material or just leave room for questions. And I think I decided for the latest. So if you don't have questions, we can talk more, or we can just go to the beach. Oh, all right. My name is Andrey. This is paper with Tomaza Valetti and Andrey Simonov. Both of them are Imperial College London. And this is paper on eye tracking, which you would think I'm not a person who did eye tracking. So maybe make horses are people who do eye tracking. That's not the case either. So for all three of us, it's a pretty new territory we're kind of going into. And I think we are pretty proud and pretty happy with what we ended up with, but it took us a while to figure out how to validate, how to think about things. So I'll talk about this in a second, about eye tracking data. Now, to start, let's motivate the paper with the following. So this is, by the way, to the conference organizers and to the kind of structure. It fits really well with the paper you just saw from Carl. In fact, a lot of examples about placement of display ads would be relevant for when we talk about this as well, and I'll talk about connections through the top. So motivation for this paper. Spring 2020, you have COVID happening. Media consumption is up by 50%. People want to know what's going on. It's pretty important. At the same time, online ad spending is down 25–30%, which typically you think these two go together. It's a platform. You have news, you have advertisers, consumers get attention, advertisers get attention of consumers, of news readers. Typically, they're kind of it's pretty useful for advertisers that media consumption is up. What is going on? Two main reasons. One is overall economic uncertainty, that advertisers just don't know how long COVID will be and cut the spending as is one of the fastest things you can cut. A different thing which motivates this paper is a practice called block lists and a general avoidance of sensitive and typically what's referred to like hard news topics. It's news topics about politics, about wars, about a lot of like things which can be serious topics for people. And so in COVID, because a lot of news were about coronavirus, this became a big issue because a lot of advertisers mainly published about COVID but didn't get any ad revenue. Why is it happening? Advertisers worry about two things. One is maybe there was less attention if I'm next to that type of content of the news and people just wouldn't look at my ad. And if they do look at my ad, maybe they just wouldn't react to the ad, or maybe they'll even react negatively. They'll think their brand perception or their actions will be negative for me because I'm placed next to that content. So that's where really the paper starts, is trying to understand how this attention spillovers from content to ads happen, and what is the consequence for recall, for purchase, for different metrics of ad effectiveness. So with this, we'll try to answer three research questions, and you'll see this fits well. There is a lot of literature related to this topic, so I'll summarize this in a second. But that's where this paper starts. We're trying to figure out, is it a valid practice to do this kind of block list and to remove some content and place an ads next to content? And for that, we also need to think about some background questions. So the first question we would like to know is, does attention to news content generate positive incremental attention to advertisement next to it? It sounds relatively simple. We expect it does, but there is theories which tell it can go either way. I think in the eye tracking literature thinking about this carefully, there is different types of attention people talk about, the top-down and bottom-up attention. And they predict opposite effects. One says you'll be focused on something very engaging and you wouldn't even notice ads next to the news article. Another says you'll be spend a lot of time on the news article, and by extension, you'll also have positive attention spillovers to content as well. So that's what we'll start trying to answer that. Then we'll try to measure, does this incremental attention to ads, does it matter for recall and purchase of the brand? And finally, we'll see how we'll do splits by content, we'll do splits by device. We'll see that really a big concern that It really is a first order concern of the type of content which is bundled with that. And I'll tell you in a second what we do, but I don't want results to be interpreted. It's always kind of, this content is always equal, is always different. We'll be measuring it in the short term, but I'll try to convince you, at least in the short term, it's different from what this advertiser thinks in terms of the block lists. All right, so what does this paper do? It's kind of a relatively straightforward paper, which I think is why I hope will be done in less than 45 minutes. Again, we'll see about that. It always tricky to plan. So one is, it is an eye tracking experiment where we recruit 1,000 participants. These participants read news articles in a sequence of 9 news articles. These articles are matched with random ads of different brands. Ads are located in the top prime in the banner ad position. It's the top position per Carl's slides and the second after this. So there's 2 side ads and the banner ad. We measure ad attention to content and ads. We also measure ad recall and purchase of the same brands advertised after the experiment. We'll write down a very simple model of attention allocation. If you don't believe our model of allocation, that's fine. You can have your own model, but we wanted something to ground our thinking how this happens. And then if you spend more attention to ads, we'll see if you are more likely to recall and purchase. And then we estimate this model, we measure effects on recall and purchase, and we do a bunch of extensions, robustness check with the data. And then I want to talk about implications for publishers, for advertisers, and different ad measurement effects. Now, very quickly, I wouldn't give a preview of the results. Again, it's a pretty straightforward paper. So hopefully by the end, we'll be on the same page what's going on. Quickly about the related literature. And there is a lot of, the paper has a bit more, there was a lot of different parts where it connects to the literature. First, it connects to literature which measures different effects of advertisement and the exposure to the ad itself or different context. In the first bucket of papers, I think Goldstein, McAfee, and Suri is closest. So they show experimentally that if people spend more time on the web page with the news and expose more to the ad, there is more recall of this ad. There is no eye tracking. It's a pretty simple experiment. It's a conference proceedings, but I think it's closest in spirits to what we're doing. It also relates to literature on the role of targeting and context. So Golfer Tucker is a typical paper you would think about when it comes up, who show that targeting of ads is valuable if you target people go into particular websites matched with consumers, there'll be more ad effects. There is a line of papers, a lot of people in the room contributed to those. What we'll see, what's different about our context is a lot of this targeted and similar to Carl's paper. This targeting happens that partly because people see different content next to ads, but often because it's different people you target if you advertise on different websites. In fact, Carl has a nice paper where he shows that individual effects explain much more difference in advertisement effectiveness than brand or article or content effects. That kind of, our results will line up with that. So think about this targeted not in terms of like which people you show to, but which content is bundled with the ad. Now, quickly over this, there was a ton of work in eye tracking data on advertising. If people, it's a fascinating literature. It focuses often on trying to set in psychological mechanisms of how ads work through the eye tracking, how brand knowledge, how different factors of design affect effectiveness. We'll do something different. We'll measure the spillovers from content to ads and how it affects purchases and recall. And so finally, there is ad avoidance literature, which wouldn't contribute much about, and Ken is a bit play in this one, and a lot of other people in the room as well contributed to this. We wouldn't directly, so evidence we'll present will be pretty consistent with that, but you'll see some of the stylized fact we document will also line up with some of the stylized fact from those. All right, any questions? Yes?
Two things. One, this sounds awfully like contextual advertising to me. So where you match the content in the ad, and I know there's a strong belief in industry that it works really well. Is there, I mean, I know Carl's other paper was eating and so on, but is there more work that shows that? Or are you going to be one of the people shedding new light on that?
I think there is definitely more work. I think there is, at least we haven't found very large scale evidence that shows an experiment which shows context effect on ad. if you know something we don't cite, or doing stuff in the paper as well, if I just forget something, let me know. But at least from what we could find, we couldn't find anything which we couldn't here. You guys don't know.
The other question, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, is do you have any kind of ecological validity about how people actually read these news articles? In an experiment, you know what they do, but does that translate to consumption in real life, right? I mean, given the lack of attention that people have, especially to detailed written content, is it just fitting one or two points in the article, getting the headline? Is the experiment trying to match that, or you don't care about that?
I think we do care. I think from what we saw, how the people read articles, they probably pay more attention than if I showed they just stumbled across a random article. A lot of the descriptives about how they read news articles line up how I think I'll read the news articles. They start from top to bottom. If I show them 9 articles, they spend less and less time. They have some decay in attention. So it seems to line up how people read articles in practice. We'll be doing experiments, so we'll learn only from the stuff we can generalize from this experiment. Again, you'll see what everybody's doing. Tell me if you think you disagree about people reading practice differently from what we do here.
It's not a question I disagree, it's because I don't know, right? I mean, the
I
challenge.
think it's pretty accurate, but if you have some like theories why it's different, that would be great.
We never, for all these eye tracking experiments, we never have a baseline, right? Because we put people in an extremely weird situation.
I'll talk about that. It's not as weird as you think, maybe.
Okay.
I'll show you in a second. That's a good thanks. That's a good point. Yes.
I think you have this infrastructure. Since there's some evidence that brand safety concerns vary a lot, like say, for example, you're in a feed-based environment versus banner ads versus video. And it seems like you could just do this with all sorts of different media formats and see sort of how this affects generalized across different settings. I think would be something of interest to a lot of advertisers.
Agreed. We've done it in one format, which is display ads. I agree it might be different in other formats, but yeah, point taken. I'll get back in a second to exact technology. That's great. I'm understanding point now, and it's good point.
Quick questions. One, I think that when you initially motivated, it seemed like it was going to be about avoiding bad news, not so much the ad, but you're trying to avoid the content about the pandemic or other negative events.
Good
How
question.
does that interplay with this? And also, are you going to worry about the fit between the ad and the content, or just the type of content, which is your third research question, I think?
Good questions. I will not talk about avoidance to news. I have a suspicion Caio might talk about this a bit, but I will not, and it's not part of the paper. Avoidance, I meant avoidance to ads. I'll show you in a second exactly what we do on that. And let me leave other things when I show you experiment next slide. I think we'll be more clear. Thank you. All right, so to give a kind of jump into the experiment, I have one busy slide about it, but wouldn't need to know anything else about experiments. So that's the only one to pay attention to. Recruited around 1,000 participants, bigger than a typical eye tracking study. How can we do it? Will be next slide. July, August 2020. Roughly 50-50 split in the US, UK, and desktop mobile devices. So do on both desktop and mobile. Mobile is unusual for eye tracking studies. We're using tracking technology again. Now I need to preview through the webcam how we can do it. I'll talk more about that. But that's why we can do mobile as well. For each participant, we show a sequence of 9 news articles. There will be different set of articles in the US and the UK from 2 different outlets in each country. Hard news will be news on hard news topics, which are also on sensitive topics. So this will be COVID. And at that time, there was a lot of controversial coverage of BLM protests, which were going on in the US, especially in the US. Soft will be celebrities or something much more soft. We randomize the order of the articles. Next to the articles, we match ads, both the display and banner ads of the same brand, of 8 different brands, and 1 article we leave blank without any ads. We do it in random order. Everything is randomized in terms of order of articles and which brand is when matched with each article. I mentioned that. Then from this, we measure. So when people read the articles, pay attention to ads, and so they do it like in the browser, like they usually will do it. And then in the end, we ask recall questions, both aided and unaided. And we ask incentivized purchase decision. The purchase decision is a choice, 8 choices between a $10 brand voucher versus a randomized amount of cash. So we're trying to induce a demand curve. I showed it worked pretty well. Why is it incentivized? We'll by a random draw, we'll realize one of these. So you rank for all 8 brands, you choose a voucher versus cash amount. And with 1/8 probability, you'll get one of these. Okay. Questions? Seems to be clear. So how do we do eye tracking? Why can't we? So typical eye tracking with a big machine. You need to like do the kind of eyes, and it's very weird. It's better here. So we recruit online panel. We can do all eye tracking through the webcam. There is a company called Lumen, and we got connections with my co-author Tomaza, who is nicely demonstrating us how the technology works here. So you start a survey, they measure location of your head, your mimics, and so if you move, they can still track it. There is 4 validation steps throughout the study where they'll ask you to look at different dots on the screen. And so through the webcam, using some machine learning algorithms, they're able to, if you move your head, they still know roughly where you look. People interested to apply it, we can talk offline, I can talk a bit in the end, how precise it is. Bottom line, if you want to measure the exact word people are looking for, it's not precise enough. If you understand roughly which paragraph, which part of the scheme, it works pretty well. I can show more details later. So that will be our technology. All our samples are recruited through an online panel. We're paying them extra because we're doing this with them. They get this bonus in the end. So we pay them around $25, like slightly more in pounds, slightly more for people in the UK. To do it. So it's like 25,000 for experiment with 1,000 people, not very much, not very little, so bigger than a typical experiment, let's put it this way. All right, so we measure recall from this eye tracking software. What do we get? We get the eye tracking data of measurement attention. So we'll track 2 metrics. One is visibility. How visible is the article and the ad on the page? Visibility is defined as more than 50% of that object is on the screen. And I think for articles, it's measured in paragraphs. So we can have a pretty good idea which parts are looking. Second is article and ad dwell. That's exactly where your eyes are looking. So it's a part of the browser pixels which you're looking now. From this we construct this map. This is just to visualize. But that's how a typical reading of the article looks. You start from top, then you go and you read these lessons and so it seems pretty consistent to me of how it will read news in reality. It doesn't come without problems, even though this eye tracking matters. So there was 2 issues with data. One is on part of our data, there was connectivity issue from Lumen's side, so someone screwed up. We couldn't connect we didn't record some of the purchase recall outcomes. So we'll have to drop some part of the data. Paper has a lot of details, it was as good as random, so we can talk more about that. But then even for data without connectivity issues, sometimes this data on eye gaze, it's not precise enough. Maybe people like really move their head a lot. So Lumen has some metrics, accuracy, precision, and gaze duration, which are common in this literature. And so we'll drop some of the data if not high quality enough data. There was a bunch of robustness check, we add them back, we do other stuff. But yeah, so that okay. To emphasize, if you want to use it, it doesn't come without some potential problem. So here is how a final sample looks like. Around half is desktop and female, around half is US, around half is hard news. A typical article is visible for slightly more than 2 minutes. Typical ad is visible for 19 seconds. Prices, 5 is average from 3 to 7, so this is randomized. Around half of people recall brands correctly, and around 1/3 of people prefer a voucher over cash amount. This is visible, this is dwell, so this is based on eye tracking. Dwell around 74 seconds, people spend an average article reading the article, and only 2.7 seconds people look at the ad. So this ratio of ad dwell to ad visible connects well to what we know from the literature. Ken has a nice paper about TV advertising, people live in the room and then people not looking at the screen. I think the ratio of attention to being present there is around 15–17%. If roughly, I don't remember exactly. We get something similar here. So at least when I wrote this, we checked, it looked pretty reasonable. It's external, it's different device. It looks pretty reasonable in that sense. Now, I told you about connectivity, just a second, I'll comment. So notice how these numbers change across rows. Let me comment on that. If there was no connectivity issues, this will be around 9,000, 9 observations for 1,000 people. So some of this is dropped because we have connectivity issues. 1/9 of this, around 1/9 don't have ads, so we don't have variables for observations without ads here. This is lower because of the issues with eye tracking data. Again, we'll lose some of this, is not precise enough. Again, this is different from this just because some articles don't have ads. So that's exactly 1/9 of articles. Question?
I mean, this is just curiosity. Would it have been useful to track the content or the topic of the article, whether we call on that?
Good point.
I don't
Good
think-
point,
I
good
don't think it
point.
invalidates anything you're saying, but it may give you a sense of the level of attention and goes back to Unnati's question of do people are they avoiding the topic? So to speak. And does that change my attention paid to the ask?
Yeah, we didn't do that. We didn't. They spent some time reading them. Like you said, are they reading or actually reading? Yeah, good
I
point.
mean, you have 25 grand lying about, so let's do it again.
Yeah, exactly. You can fund us with some if you know somewhere. Let's do it again.
If I had money, I would be in the Bahamas.
All right, that's our summary. Questions?
I'm just wondering clarification. What about the scrolling behavior, click behavior? What about how long the article is? Do you capture that or care about that?
So article was on the page for 2 minutes, 13 seconds on average. This gives you the mean to max. There's a big max here, which I just now realized.
Is that capturing the scrolling behavior? And there
What do you mean by scrolling behavior?
to read the article?
Yeah, so whenever it's on the screen, that will say it is visible. So that's like, so it's visible if it's shown on the browser screen. It's not loaded, it's on the screen. Same for the ad. So that's how much ad is on the side. Yes.
I know you said the error on the eye tracking is, you talk about the data, but did you notice if the size of the error was correlated with ad content, like the important X or Y variable?
I don't think it correlates, so there is no difference in ad measurement across ads. So if you just look at different ads are rendered, so different ads are rendered in measure different articles. It's not a function of what is the quantity, it's just a function of how much it removes the ad and how they behave. So what does it correlate with? Ad quality goes down as later in the experiment. First article has higher quality, last article has lower quality. Validation happens every 3 articles. After 3 articles, there will be validation. It drops after the validation because people move the robot, people take breaks. So this kind of those patterns is tend to quality much. Good question. All right. From summary to some quick descriptives from the data, and I said I'll do half an hour. I clearly would probably just do 45 minutes. Sorry for that. So quick summaries on the data. One is from raw data. What is the correlation between attention to article, attention to ad? I told you before it can be positive or negative. There's different theories. It is pretty positive. So this is just raw data. This is log attention to article, log attention to ad in UK, in US, on desktop and mobile, across different contexts. It's pretty similar. Difference here is driven by USA Today, which has different layouts. So the ad is often hidden slightly differently. It's like slightly still positive, just like slightly less steep for that website. We do it by article. I think there was somewhere, there was residualized version when we extract fixed effects and keeps so it looks positive in a lot of variety of specifications. That will be one of the first results I'll show you later. It will be positive spillover attention from the article to the ad. That's the first one I wanted to show you. Second one, and this is just a sanity check. Do demand slopes slope down? Like, does demand goes down if price increases? Yes. What identifies demand? Remember, for each person, we randomly give a $10 voucher versus $3 to $7 cash amount. That's what pins down this. That's good. I can do it by brand. Looks pretty kind of less precise. I'll click on one thing in this stock. So it looks like this. For some brands, it's steep. For some, this is kind of a bit less more noisy. You get the idea. Finally, how does attention to ad connect to recall and purchase? For both, if people spend more attention looking at ads, they're more likely to recall, they're more likely to purchase. This is without any controls, just descriptive from the data, but it tells you where we're going in the talk. There'll be some positive effect of attention to ads on purchase and recall. All right. So from this, let's now take a step back and formalize a bit. For the sake of time, I wouldn't stop too much here, but I wanted to get how we thought about this problem.
People put the soft and the hard articles are.
We can do this, but I'll show you later. I'll show you splits by hard and soft. Okay, will be, yeah. So later, for the sake of time, I don't have a picture. I wouldn't kind of go back, but I'll show you in a second. All right, so how do we think about attention allocation? We have a reader who decides how much to pay attention to article versus ad. We have a pretty stylized model where they have they'll spend more attention on an article given the match value with the article. There is a cost to that, which we normalize in a pretty standard way just to get some optimal allocations. If there is no ad, that's it. They just solve this problem. If there is an ad, one is they potentially don't like having the ad, so they're ad avoidant. They spend less time looking at the content. Second is there is some preference they might have for ads. They spend more attention looking at the ad. There is a cost, and then this is the attention spillover part. So the ad and article can have complementarities or substitute, can be complements or substitutes. You can spend more attention on one if there is more attention on another, or vice versa. This simple model gives us this optimal attention allocations. If you don't like the model, you can think about this as being reduced form for something else, because this is what will take the data. You allocate attention to articles, given your match value. If there is no ad, that's it. Otherwise, there is ad avoidance and some complementarity. You decide how much attention to allocate to ads, given the preference for ads, plus again, the spillover from the article. Okay, so this is the first step, attention allocation model. The second step, consumers decide to make recall and purchase decisions. The most important part here is how much attention you spend on the ad affects your decisions to recall and purchase. This is, again, we don't have a microfounded model. This is some reduced form, especially for recall. It's not a choice model, it's just a decision, do you recall or not, given you've seen the ad. And I'll tell you about how we parameterize this in the estimation in a second. All right, so this is our very simple model. Questions? Nice. Okay, so then let's go to empirics. First, we'll deal with the model on how we estimate this attention allocation choice. We'll do it in two steps. First, we'll estimate the parameters of attention to the ad, which is some fixed effects of the ad. So some ads are more interesting, less interesting, that's delta, and the complementarity between the article and the ad. If we ignore the fact that this gamma enters the second equation as well, here we can just use OLS. I'll try to convince you in a second why we can ignore it, but that's one thing we can do. If we cannot, one thing we can do is we can instrument for the amount of attention people spend on the article by taking the amount of attention they spend on, like other people spend on this article. Think about this as leave one out instrument, where if it's a very interesting article, ad is matched next to it, then you'll look more at that because of your kind of decision, but because everyone else looked more at the articles and average more interesting. Once we have these parameters, we can estimate alphas and betas through the second regression. We wouldn't really need these parameters for anything else we'll do afterwards, but I thought it's interesting to estimate them because we have the data and we can see what happens in the model. All right. So from this, a table, I'll show you one table with all results and let me walk you through what's happening there. So first, the OLS part. This column only has differences in attention to articles and ads by step order. Step order is in which order they were shown on the page. An average person spends around 2.7 seconds looking at the first article on the first page. 1 extra second of attention to, first ad, 1 extra second of the attention to the article leads to 0.01 second of attention to ad. So for context, if an average article gets around 2 minutes of attention, then the ad will get around like 1.2 seconds of attention as well. So that's spillover from the article to the ad. This estimate is consistent if we include article and brand effects and also include individual fixed effects. That's pretty stable spillover from the article to ad. You might think, wait a second, but this gamma also enters this equation. This is how can we do it this way? Now, what helps us a lot here is that average attention to article around 2 minutes, that creates those 1 extra second attention to the ad. Average time spent on the ad is 2.7 seconds. So that multiplied by 0.01 is less than 0.3 of a second for the ad. So we assume this attention spillover is symmetric, and we do some robustness to show we don't see some weird effects go another way. What helps us a lot that we can do it using OLS is with very tiny effects in the other direction, just because of the difference in size of these two different objects. Carl, question.
Measuring attention and then subsequent purchase, and you have this sort of utility function that as opposed to advertising, article, and interaction. Can you say anything about, which would be super interesting, can you say anything about whether, how much fraction of the sample treats advertising good versus a bad, and similarities and all those things that literature's kind of wanted to get at, but hasn't really been able to do?
Excellent, that's an excellent question. Let me go through this and I'll talk in a second about where this will come into an analysis. We don't find much evidence of that, but I can talk about, well, I think we can do more. I'll show you what we'll do. Let's talk after then what else we can do. It's a great question. Okay, so this is showing you our last results and giving you intuitive explanations why this reverse causality effect should be pretty tiny and we're not worried about this. If you like to show it, good for us, we can check. In the last 3 columns, we have IV estimates. Notice that in IV, to estimate this gamma, we use attention of other people to the same article. So that doesn't suffer from the same reverse causality problem. We get pretty consistent estimates. We get basically similar estimates here. Last thing I'll tell you, so this coefficient is the ad avoidance parameter. What does it mean? It means if there is ad next to the news article, people spend 7 seconds less reading the news article. If the page doesn't have any ads, people spend 7 seconds. Okay, great. So we established there is a positive spillover from the news article to ads in this step. Now let's go to our second step. Now let's see how this attention to ad affects recall and purchase. And we'll treat these 2 equations separately because there is nothing in the data which allows us to identify how you affect recall and how that affects purchase in turn. So that's, we'll just estimate these 2 equations in parallel. In this specification, we'll include step order fixed effects, brand and brand by price fixed effects, and different individual demographics like income, gender, education, age, etc. We have a specification with individual fixed effects. For OLS, results are less precise, but pretty consistent. For IV, we don't have enough residual variations in the data to say much. So it's all in the paper, but for now, we decided to pick one consistent specification through all. So this will be our spec for the results going forward. Okay. Okay, so notice, Carl, to your question, if we're not worried about the Becker-Murphy theory of advertisement, then this OLS with some controls should be pretty reasonable. People just pay attention to ad, it comes from some decision, and we're fine. If no, then this decisions to allocate attention to ads can be positively correlated with absolutes. And that's what we're worried about this complementarity story. We'll treat it in the next step with an IV. But for now, we just assume away that problem.
Andrey?
Yeah.
Are we on the right-hand side of the second equation? Are you assuming that people can buy without recall because of the experiment?
Correct. That's what I said. We're not controlling for recall in the purchase. Yeah. So you ask about recall, and then for if you recall correctly or not, we'll always ask you to purchase as well. There is nothing in the data which allows us to do this kind of moderation model, like what's the right term? Mediation or whatever is the right term I was mixing up. Because otherwise, if we plug in this recall here, it will be a bad control. There is nothing which separates out one effect from another. So we just do this to equation.
But then that
Just do a spotlight analysis. That's what I heard in my head.
I see. So that's maybe I'll.
but that calls into question the kind of external validity of these measurements, right?
What do you mean?
Because I'm not going to buy something without recalling it. So
In fact, in our case, we might actually trust our buy result or purchase results more than recall, because our purchase results are incentivized. Our recall results, you can click nothing with everything. So I don't think I agree. So like we measure noisily recall and purchase, and it doesn't mean that every purchase needs to also have recall before that.
if I'm an advertiser, I would.
That's your model of how you think the advertising works with the funnel. But we can still estimate both of these equations having direct effect on purchase and direct effect on recall. I don't think why is
Then why advertise?
because you want to sell goods.
Okay, if there's no recall, then why advertise? The mechanism that we think advertising works through is that you become aware of the product and you recall something and you buy it, right? Here you're saying I just go straight to buy. So the exposure of the ad is not really required, right?
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand fully, but I think if I understand, so like we are still assuming that the effect of advertisement on purchase goes a lot through recall. We cannot put recall in this equation because we will not be separate out these two different effects. In theory, you can have different theories of advertisement, informational, persuasional reasons. I don't see why you can incorrectly recall but still decide to purchase. Recall is a noisy proxy for what's going on. In theoretical model, I think I agree with you. Mostly when you purchase, you also recall before. We just don't model it because we have nothing to separate this two effects. We'll talk also. So I see 3 hands. Let's go, Bharat.
So just to extend a bit on Cody's question, in your experiment, do you measure the purchase decision after each article is read or at the end of the experiment?
Great question. Thanks in the end. You first do unaided recall, then you do aided recall, and then we do purchase.
So then, like, the purchase decision has to go through recall.
Well, again, it got sequentially, it probably does. I cannot prove it to you, so I don't have evidence the data to prove. I think I agree with the theory, but I just don't have evidence. Ali?
You explained that I probably didn't catch it. So the purchase thing is in the end, you show them the brand and you ask them whether they want to purchase it, right?
We show them 8 choices of the voucher for this brand versus cash.
So for this brand versus cash.
Correct.
So it could be that I don't recall this brand, but it increases category
But you
demand.
still choose the voucher.
Oh, but it increases category demand and you see the list for purchase. So
That's interesting, yeah, that's possible. That's a valid theory. Olivia?
Yeah, so can the ad have any effect on price sensitivity?
Say again?
Can the ad affect price sensitivity?
Good question. We didn't look at this much. Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't look at this much. So we include the brand by price fixed effect. So everything about demand curve is stepped out by this. We just didn't, I mean, we should.
Let's stop writing, the paper is conditionally accepted.
We still, I think based on what, I think we'll still have time to add stuff. Carl,
You have time for a question before.
yes, please. I'll be quick.
So you observe attention, you don't manipulate it. Is it possible that, again, purchase leads to intention instead of attention leading to purchase? In other words, I know I'm interested in something.
Right, so it's kind of this close to the Becker-Murphy type of story. Possible, IV will help with this. Now notice, in this OLS, we observed ad, it is like decided by the same people. Recall that our ads are randomly matched with articles. So big part of the attention to ads, there'll be more attention if it's matched with an interesting article. So that's what helps us a lot here to manage. All right, I'll quickly go OLS result, and I wanted to show you the IV results, which I teased with the attention allocation model in our discussion. So this is from this OLS model. Separately for ad visible and ad dwell for recall and purchase. First, overall, extra second of ad visible of the visibility of that increases recall probability by 0.3%, purchase probability by 0.1%. So effects are smaller. We need to your question before, effects seems to be smaller for purchase, which will be consistent with the funnel, but that's kind of one of the things we can look at. For ad dwell, very similar, but of course, 1 second of ad dwell when you actually look at the ad will have higher magnitude. It happens much less. It increases recall by 3.4% points and then 0.2 for purchase. Very quickly, because of the time, results are similar on desktop and mobile. It's not something we thought about upfront, but in the review process, our very helpfully we pointed out there is much less results on the quality of eye tracking for mobile in this results. There is just less evidence. So we do the splits by device. Also, everything in the attention I showed you before, we also do the splits by device. So it's kind of it nicely works on both mobile and desktop. And then this is the part which motivated the paper. We see pretty similar effects both on hard news and soft news. And it's pretty consistent. It's, if anything, results are slightly bigger for our hard news stories and soft news stories. They're not significantly different, but if anything, magnitude is slightly different. Okay, so that's the part which I wanted to discuss a bit. So one of the concerns you might have is that attention to ads also correlates with some unobserved preferences for the brand. I love Starbucks. I would get a voucher anyway, I'll go get coffee. I know Ron is not here, he'll disagree that I love Starbucks, but it's a separate thing. Like he wouldn't like Starbucks. But then because of it, I also pay more attention to ads. That's the McEnroe, Stigler complementarity of ads and brands. To resolve this, we wouldn't use the entire attention to ads. We'll instrument ad attention with the attention to article. That goes, we have randomization of articles matched to ads. It's more interesting article for you, you spend more time there. Because of it, you spend more time seeing the ad on the screen. Do you recall and purchase more because of that? And so notice this first stage is exactly the gamma from our attention allocation. That's exactly the thing I showed you estimated before. But it's a positive spillover. All right, even bigger, but last table for today. Great. So first, in this table, we have IV results, again, for recall and purchase, for ad visible and ad dwell. For both, we use article dwell as our IV, because article visible is mechanically correlated with ad visible mechanically correlates with article visible. That is not very fast. All the first stages are pretty consistent and significant. So this is, think about this as gammas from attention location model for article dwell and ad dwell and article dwell and ad visible. In terms of the effects, we see one is much more imprecise effects. Two, insignificant effect or recall. This goes to a discussion on incentivized. We think this, our theory for this is that we don't have an incentivized recall of the brand. And it's, by the way, I'm showing you aided recall. It's similar for unaided. We get significant and pretty strong effects for purchase if anything magnitudes here are larger than magnitudes in OLS. If Beck and Murphy was the right theory, it should be the other way around. So there's something else is going on for it. And it's similar for mobile and desktop. It's similar for hard news and soft news. Again, for hard news, if anything, it's slightly stronger than for soft news. All right, I wouldn't go through any of this in detail because of the time. We confirm the results, not with this IV, but with a different IV. First stage works well, but that's a second stage is insignificant mainly, like just less variation. We test for attention fatigue, so this kind of estimated sort of linear effect of attention and quadratic effect. We find that more attention with diminishing returns. So this was in previous literature, but it's nice to confirm. There is 5 different robustness checks we did for eye tracking with different metrics. There is also, because if you're worried about measurement error, you'll be worried our positive attention spillovers is just imprecisely measured attention. So we do robustness by keeping only 50% of surface of the ad, keeping only interior, and check the magnitudes. They line up pretty well. So there is no, so in any of this, we don't find any difference. Our results are driven by measurement error. We spend a lot of time on this. I'm happy to talk offline about what we can and cannot do and what we find. We had a different IV strategy with political mismatch of articles and people. We have still pretty good first stages, but imprecise second stage estimates. Again, happy to talk about it offline. I'm on time, so I wanted to close with 3 quick implications. So one is, we see positive attention spillovers from content to ads, and it means incentives of publishers and advertisers align pretty well. We have like several years ago, you'll think, oh, clickbait and BuzzFeed might be kind of, it goes against those practices. BuzzFeed is not in the business anymore, so I guess it kind of confirms that the value of publishers to invest in high quality content is what advertisers want. That's good for us. It's a different way to measure ad effects. We don't use extensive margin like we typically have in large scale experiments. This is intensive margin of amount of attention. Comes with a caveat. It comes from a pretty specialized experiment in a setting. So take all of this with a grain of salt, because this is short-term effects on purchase right after the experiment. Finally, this practice of ad blocking, in the long run, I can see a lot of arguments we don't capture a lot of effects, but at least this first order effect on an average person that we do here, there is no difference at all of the content on the ads, or like effect of ads across content. Why did it matter? When I was, I think, doing this slide initially, this was March 2022. There is very similar thing now happens with war in Ukraine, with war in general. It's the news content where society needs the most, which news organizations are penalized for because advertisers are worried about it. So I think the method is first order, high attention content is what you want to go after, is a pretty useful, I think, for the industry. With that, all I have. Thanks a lot. Promise you have to shine, but so you could.
Okay. Right. I wish I could say that we saved the best for last, but who are we kidding here? I want to thank the invitation to discuss this paper. I'm very much flattered to have a chance to try to make some contribution here. So, what is this paper about? What is the what, so to speak? Okay, so we're looking at a specific connection and intersection that I think is very, very important and relevant. Look at the intersection between news and advertising in an online context, specifically thinking about the content of advertising, excuse me. In particular, we can think of spillovers, thus paying attention to an article spill over to the ad, and in fact, vice versa. And does the content type, hard versus soft, which I'm going to go back to in a second, matter? Okay, so this is the what. But before going into more detail, I want to talk a little bit about the how, and even before that, talk about the why behind this paper. So here's what I thought. First, I knew Andrey was going to present and he was going to crush with the explanation. So I felt like, oh, I don't need to give much more detail. I also saw I was the very last one, so I decided to add a bunch of pictures and not a single equation. So everyone is okay with that. So should we still care about digital advertising? I'm very biased. I went in to find some figures for this. I was in part curious myself. So in marketing, we care a lot about advertising. To the extent that you care about advertising, you should totally care about digital. Internet here is almost 2/3. So that's great. That makes me feel good because I studied this. If you think that part of our interest should be justified by how much money is involved in a market, well, good news for us as well. This keeps growing, okay? And of course, many changes over time, who knows, but hopefully we still agree that digital advertising is big, is important, we should keep studying it, okay? Now, you can also think about, should we care about online news consumption? And that might be a little more subjective in terms of your own interest. So maybe you are interested in studying news, maybe not. Regardless of our own personal interests, I think we can all agree that it is a very important market. Some people, many theorists say that one of the necessary conditions for democracy to work well is for the public to be very well informed, which may or may not explain the current state of affairs around the world, but that's a different story, okay? So let's say we agree that we should care about the news market. Should we care about online news? And as you might expect, yes, okay? So again, going after some general reference here, this is the Pew Research Center. If you ask people where they like to get their news from, digital devices keeps growing. Okay, mostly stealing the thunder from television, radio, and print publications seem to be quite stable. Okay, so if we care about news, we should definitely care about online news. This is, of course, a statement of preference. If you want to know what people actually do, this is a little harder to see. But mostly, if you look at online or digital platforms and news consumption, mostly coming from news websites and apps, followed by search for news, social media, which made me feel a little uneasy. Many people getting news from podcasts, which made me feel even more uneasy, but that's the world we live in. Okay, so hopefully we can all agree that we should care about news, we should care about online news and the consumption of online news. From a managerial perspective, you can think about advertisers. I was thinking more about news outlets and whether they should care about advertising as well. I was able to find something more credible, in my opinion, for newspapers. And if you look at newspapers, the percentage of revenue that comes from online ads, ad revenue coming from online, keeps growing over time. So it seems to be important for them. Now, just an aside, something that I ran into and I thought was interesting, maybe for those of you who know much more about this market than I do, this is going to be trivial or boring. But what seems to be happening is not that this is actually growing in absolute terms. The absolute revenue coming from digital advertising seems to be quite stable. What comes from print is going down. Who knows why? Maybe you know, I have no idea. Maybe they're getting their funding from somewhere else, subscriptions, who knows? All else constant, this doesn't seem to be great for the newspapers, at least, okay? So at this point, if you are convinced that this intersection between online advertising, digital news consumption is important, then we can start thinking about content and get to what the paper is doing, okay? So they ran this very nice experiment. People were randomly assigned ad article pairs over sequence, okay? They have this very nice eye tracking technology that gives a better measurement of what attention is. They can assess these effects because of randomization. They try to assess ad effectiveness. So the very precise kind of causal effect that you can think of here is, if I increase attention to an ad by 1 second, what's the effect of that on the probability that you call the brand, that you purchased? And then this kind of nice idea of a model of attention to the different measures, does that create spillover? So if I pay attention to the article, is that going to make me pay more attention to the ad, and vice versa, and of course the role of content. So what did they find? Attention to articles does spill over to attention to ads. The other way around doesn't seem to be going on that much. So that is, I found that to be very interesting. More attention to ads increases recall and purchase, which sounds good to me. News content does not impact ad effectiveness, which I find very, very interesting. And I'm going to go back to this in a second. Okay. So what am I taking away from this? So first of all, we find this ad effectiveness result suggesting that ad slots are valuable to advertisers. That made me feel very good because this is very near and dear to my heart. We should keep trying to assess the effects and value of ad slots. Once we know their effects, we can tell or try to figure out advertisers' valuations. If they know their valuations, we can start thinking about how to sell these things. Carl gave a great explanation about posted prices versus auctions, and if you want to go down an auction optimization route, you can go crazy there too. Believe me, I tried. So there is that. There is this block list policy, apparently a bad idea. Now, a pro is that this gives us an opportunity to do even more research on targeting and how we can improve on this. A con is that this is kind of more complex, of course. From a certain angle, simplicity would have been very nice here. It's not, so we have to deal with that. One thing that I loved that I'm glad I brought up, I don't think Andrey emphasized this enough, is that we have this measure from eye tracking and the typical measure visibility, and it turns out that they correlate very well, and great news, no pun intended, because quite often we have no availability to eye tracking technology. I was thinking about, are they going to put those on phones? Are you going to know about it? So when an app asks, can I have access to your camera? And you think about Is it gonna track what I'm looking at? How are people gonna react to this? I don't know. So I found this encouraging, okay? So where do we go from here, okay? This established very credibly a bunch of facts. What can I do with this? The one thing I thought of is that, we're getting a bunch of people and showing them a sequence of articles. I think this goes a little bit in the direction of one of Puneet's comments, which is what you read is an active choice. Okay? You choose what article you read. Now you can imagine that people are self-selecting into different articles. If their preferences are correlated with this selection, well, then we can start thinking about interesting ways of correcting for this selection, right? And then we can start thinking about how you could curate content and then how that interacts with advertising and so on. And I ran into this idea of news avoidance, different from ad avoidance. And I thought there was something here. So I'm going to go very briefly into my own personal experience, which was a little lame. And then I'm going to tell a little bit about my journey for confirmation bias here, okay? So I apologize to you if this hits too close to home, but I tried to keep up with news back home from Brazil, okay? I'm going to translate what matters in a second. This is the web page. See, I'm going to block for you what I call hard news, okay? What I blocked is what I think is hard news. Hard in the paper, BLM, and COVID. My personal subjective interpretation of hard news is difficult topics, things that make you uncomfortable, okay? So I'm not gonna go through everything here, but if you look at this, it's not great, okay? This is what they're showing to me once I go to the website, okay? And I can promise you something, this is very summarized. Every single story here is much worse than it reads, okay? Great. So I don't know about you, but I have enough tragedy in my life. I don't want to make it worse, okay? So I run into this, I look at all these ads, all these articles, and I think, I'm not clicking on any of this crap, okay? But for better or worse, I was trained as an economist, and I thought, well, a profit maximizing enterprise chose to do this, so maybe I'm the one who's wrong. So I went after confirmation bias. I found this very nice Reuters University of Oxford survey here, and here's what you get, okay? These graphs are awful, but what matters is the trend. So if you look at this and think, proportion of people who are very or extremely interested in news going down, okay? What I thought was even more interesting was who avoids news. So over time, countries, okay? So over time, more people are trying to avoid news, okay? And so if you're gonna blame me for being alienated and irresponsible, I'm gonna dodge this and say that my upbringing and culture are responsible. Brazil is up there, number one, okay? More than 50%, great. But followed by UK and US, I found that interesting because Andrey's data come from UK and US. And 38% over the world on average, okay? So what is going on? What do you think is causing this? Surprise. Hard news, okay? If you ask people, why aren't you looking into news? Well, hard news kind of literally with respect to the paper, COVID and politics, okay? Negative effect on my mood. Everything that I showed you from Brazilian news had a terrible effect on my mood, okay? By the way, I looked at that just a second ago. Top of the page, Elon Musk demands impeachment or, impeachment of Brazilian Supreme Court justice. So, right? Hard news. So at the end of the day, at the end of the day, I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm trying to think about, we should kind of have this very interesting fact that you can spill over from articles to ads, but what if we take a step back and think about, all right, conditional on arriving to the article web page, I can see some attention going on, but at this point, and I think Andrey is already working on this, think about demand for news, okay? Maybe if the guy gets to an article, my ad is valuable, but if they never end up there, well, who cares, right? So at the end of the day, very, very, very interesting topic. I don't know much about the domain, so I just gave a few thoughts here. I would encourage or urge you to read this paper. It's wonderfully written. There are a lot of cool things that Andrey didn't have time to go over, and it's great. And as I was reading, I thought that there are many, many avenues for future research. So thank you so much.